Hi, I'm Robert Hannon, and I'm pleased to have with me Dr. Michael Krouss, a professor of linguistics at the University of Alaska Fairbanks and the editor of, in honor of Eyak, The Art of Anna Nelson Harry. And that is the book from which Wolf Woman is derived. Dr. Krouss, maybe we begin and talk a bit about the different versions of Wolf Woman, a 1933 version, a version you recorded, and of course a stage version now.
That's a vast and long saga, actually, because naturally any traditional Eyak tale, Alaska Native literature, has its own prehistoric background. This tale came from somewhere, someplace. We sort of never know who first writes or composes a folk song or a folk tale, for example. That's the very nature of traditional literature. But we can be sure that Anna herself learned it from someone. She told a version of it in her young years in 1933, when she was, I guess, 27, 28, which was recorded in the book by De Laguna and Burkett Smith, published in Copenhagen in 1938, tale number 19, which is an early version of this story as told in a much more traditional way by Anna when she was in her 20s. Then I interviewed her, and she told me this, her version that we have here, in the 1960s, when she was in her 60s. And there's a vast difference between the early, more or less traditional, straightforward telling of it and her telling of it in 1965, which adds a whole personal dimension which is rather complex because of the fact that she was by that time virtually the only person left who could tell Eyak tales, and therefore was being the last of her kind, transcends the traditional limitations of storytelling and create something entirely, or almost entirely new from it. Then the saga of this thing continues. This version, which she told me I am the only person who really contributed nothing to, I hope. That is, I only faithfully recorded it on tape, and from the tape faithfully recorded every single syllable of exactly the way she told the story, and put that in print. So then along comes someone from another culture who transforms this with modern dance of American 20th century and some New Age music, and her own sense of the meaning of the story into a totally different medium, which involves actually none of the original Eyak text, obviously. And even that, the saga doesn't even end there, because that, the older version of that, which was performed, I guess, in 1990 or 1989, 1990, got further transformed in the version that we see on the tape here, much of which is James Naliak's contribution. He himself is in Yupik from Barrow, the opposite end of Alaska practically, seeing what his own vision in this too, so that it has become from, you might say, an old traditional Eyak tale to something transcending that from Anna in her older years, transmitted simply by me technically as a linguist. Then again, the transformation by Suzanne Womack and the choreographer, and from there, still further creativity. The thing has become a pan-Alaskan universal art happening.
Story. Well, in the introduction to your book, In Honor of Eyak, you write, Anna Nelson Harry was one of a very last of a whole nation, the Eyaks. Her death is full of meaning for all mankind. Obviously, to a certain extent, you must have been sensitive to the universal implications of her story and the story of the Eyaks right from the beginning. Is that true?
No.
No.
There are so many layers of meaning to this whole thing that when I, right from the beginning, if you're talking about the moment where Anna was telling me the story, I was surely struggling just to understand the words of the Eyak and to handle the tape recorder and the situation. And I still haven't, to tell you the truth, gotten to the bottom of all the significance of the relationship between people and wolves that this is about, in addition to people and other kinds of people. And since wolves are people too, that just gives you some notion of the possible complexity of the thing. The most important or interesting non-traditional aspect of Wolf Woman for me and for Anna, and perhaps universally, is the difference between the way it was told when she was in her 20s in 1933 and when she told it to me in 1965, because she had lived a lifetime marked by especially the disappearance of her own people around her, then the death of her first husband, which was the end of the very last Eyak marriage ever contracted, 1918. And Galusha died in 1938. In 1939, she moved to Yakutat, which is Tlingit country, and married Samson Harry, a Tlingit man. As she puts it in her own lament for her people, she took refuge there. She saved herself there.
Her life wasn't easy to begin with either, was it?
That's part of the tragic history, or the final chapter of the history of the Eyaks, which she also eloquently describes in her book, not herself personally, but about the good life that the Eyaks had around Cordova, and then abruptly how that ended in the late 19th century with the first arrival of the canneries, which seriously interfered with the Eyak way of life, and with the destroyed Eyak society, and also seriously hurt the salmon, which the Eyak people so depended on. And then the arrival of the railroad, all during her youth, and the final destruction of her people during this period of utter tragedy for a whole Alaskan nation, yes.
I was sort of struck.
She was, I might add, well, she saw herself become orphaned when her mother was murdered before her very eyes, and lived partly orphaned as a kind of Cinderella amongst what was left of the Eyak people. So her youth was far from easy.
Was it common, do you think, in Eyak culture for storytellers to reflect their current life condition in their storytelling?
I would submit that generally that is true of all oral history, that for the most part these are not stories the listeners are hearing for the first time, even from the person who's telling the story. Like one can imagine a small room, the story is told only in winter evenings, and the family is gathered around, or the extended family is gathered around, and the storyteller is telling the story for the third time that a given child who's about to go to sleep again has heard this thing already. But for Anna, who was, as I say again, the last of her kind, and who was not telling these stories in anything like a traditional setting, but telling them to a linguist with a tape recorder during the day in the summer, instead of during the evening in the winter to her family. She had found someone, it is true, who at least could understand her telling the story in Eyak and who valued them. And that was enough of a difference to make her do it. But the real meaning for Anna is, in addition, the fact that she was the last of her kind, and thereby, should we say, liberated at the same time, telling these stories out into the blue for the world, liberated from the constraints of traditional storytelling. There's nobody there listening to say, no, that part's wrong, or no, that part's not even in the story. She was at liberty now, you might say tragically at liberty, being the last of her kind, to tell the story just exactly as she wished.
And there's no chance that this culture will ever live again in any way like it formerly did?
Yeah, I would not myself presume to say that the Eyak people are finished. No. Although I could say that they have come closer to it than any other language or group in Alaska.
You've lived with this tale probably closer than anybody beyond after Anna Nelson Harry. What would you want people to get out of it after they see the film, maybe after they read the book? What do you think is important for them to get out of it?
Most of all, what I would like people to remember in this is the fact that Eyak is a very poignant example, a very significant part of Alaskan history, past, present, and future. And that the native insight into human existence is fully as valid as anyone else's, and that there is an untold, untellable wealth of human creativity and human greatness in Alaska's native peoples, even the very smallest of them, like Eyak.
Well, Dr. Krouss, I want to thank you for spending some time with us, and thank you for editing the work of The Art of Anna Nelson Harry. Thanks for coming around.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.